think we got up to we completed the paragraph with the word v'achar, and we're up to the one on Reish Lamed Hey, starting with the word gam. And in this section on Torah, most recently, author was going through with us a little bit of the history of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Shebichtav, and Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Shebichtav being given to Moshe at Sinai, and then written down by Moshe either throughout the years that they were wandering in the wilderness or at the very end, according to different opinions in the Talmud. More specifically, the author here was talking about the oral Torah and how that was recorded. First as the Yerushalmi, first as the Balmi, and the Yerushalmi. First he discussed the Yerushalmi and then the Bavli. And that was kind of an interesting history about who wrote the different Talmudim and where and why. So that brings us up to the paragraph starting with the word Gam. Gam yisbayar me'em dvorim shegozu chachamim nevim shebechol dor v'dor. There's also included, I believe he means in the Talmudim, meaning in the Bavli and in the Yerushalmi, there is included a discussion of the different decrees that were decreed by the sages and the prophets of every generation, lasso sayeg l'Torah, whose intention was to make a guard, a protecting fence for the Torah. As was heard by Moshe Rabbeinu on the pasuk that says, "Shneimar u'shamartem es mishmarti." You shall guard my guarding. That was explained to mean asu mishmeres the mishmarti. Make a guard for my guarding, from which we derive the idea of the rabbis having the authority to make decrees which are protective legislation around the Torah, a fence. And there's also included in these Talmudim the customs and the different types of enactments that were made with the intention of being practiced from generation to generation. According to the discretion of the particular Beis Din of any generation. Shenimar, as it says, do not detour from what they tell you, right or left. Meaning from here in the Torah we see again, the Torah authorizes the sages to make decrees and enactments which are incumbent upon the Jewish people to follow and not deviate from, right or left. Mishpatim v'dinim ufloim, and so too other types of laws and statutes which are very wondrous, that were not received from Moshe. But rather they were discussed and decreed by the Beis Din of any particular generation, through the principles through which the Torah is expounded. Those are referring to the 13 principles. And these laws were discussed, were researched thoroughly and ratified by the great wise sages. Hakol Chiber Rav Ashi b'Talmud. All of this was organized by Rav Ashi in the Talmud, Moshe v'ad yamav, from the time of Moshe until his days. V'achar Beis Dino shel Rav Ashi. After the Beis Din of Rav Ashi, who was responsible for codifying the oral Torah in the Babylonian Talmud, Shechibor Talmud U'Gemaroi, who wrote the Talmud and completed it, Bimei Beno, Nitpazur Yisrael B'chol Haratzois Pizur Yoser. Then from that time on, the diaspora of the Jews went spreading across the globe to a much greater degree than had there been, than there was heretofore, than there heretofore had been. V'higiu l'ktzos v'li'im rechokim. They got to the four corners of the world and to far distant islands, like the Bahamas. The Rav V'sah Ketata Ba'olam, and there was increased disagreement in the world. V'nishtabshu hadrochim b'gayasos. So the ways became obstructed with armies and so forth. V'nismat Talmud Torah. As a result, Torah study diminished because people were persecuted, they were cut off, lines of communication were limited, so that the integration of Torah learning between all the different dispersed communities became compromised. And from that point on, Jews no longer went in to learn in the yeshivas alafim uravavois, thousands and tens of thousands, kmo shehaya mikodim, as it was earlier. Ella, rather, turning over to Reish Lamed Vov.
What stages was he talking about?
What years?
He says before his time.
We're talking about after the sealing of the Talmud Bavli, which is in the year 450 or so.
He said there were many people learning then, but not
Until that time, many people were learning. Thousands of tens of thousands of Torah students. Yes. For example, in Bavel, Torah learning flourished. And there were thousands of academies and tens and hundreds of thousands of students.
Why would it flourish? It's Babel.
Yes, but it's true, initially destroyed the temple and exiled the Jews. But eventually, the Babylonian society in general was a very open and tolerant society. And that's, they integrated very much the different beliefs and ideals of different nations.
We were slaves in Babylon?
We were taken into captivity,
We were enslaved.
but we were not enslaved ultimately. I mean, maybe some were. Many Jews were, but eventually, but many were not. And eventually, they were given a certain degree of freedom and liberty, and the communities grew, and they were very prosperous. And they were given religious autonomy. A Jewish scholar was appointed over the Jewish communities called the Exilarch. He was the Reish Galusa. And Torah learning thrived there in Babel. That's one of the reasons given as to why, for example, our sources say that in God's creating mankind, He gathered earth from the four corners of the globe onto the place of the Mizbeach, the altar in Yerushalayim, the place of the Beis Hamikdash, and the earth from the different parts of the world went into constructing the body of Adam, such that we're told that the earth from the four corners of the globe went into creating his four limbs. The earth from Eretz Yisrael, it would seem specifically the place of the Mizbeach itself, went into creating Adam's head. But the earth from Babylon particularly was used to create his torso. And for this reason, to prepare the Jewish people to be accepted into Babylon and to thrive there, the torso being the location of the vital organs, so that Babylon became a center of Jewish vitality, and there was a great renaissance in Jewish learning that took place there. And all of this was prepared for by God's making Adam's torso out of earth from Babylon. But the head has to always be towards Jerusalem. Yeah.
Before the Greek Romans in time.
Yes, before.
They appointed Reish Galusa, right?
Who? The Babylonians did.
Babylonians?
Reish Galusa was a no. No. Reish Galusa was.
How much more was before the Romans?
So the Babylonians were, you're talking about. Well,
between the first and second.
You had the Babylonian Empire, which rose. Yes, after the first.
Destruction of the first temple.
Destruction of the first temple.
After between
it was actually after destruction of the first temple, and between the first and second, and even after the second was built.
Oh, this the Jews in Babylon.
Most stayed.
Most stayed.
Yes, most did not come back to Israel. Only the abjectly poor or the extremely pious came to Israel. The vast majority of Jews stayed in Babylon. Well, not initially, but yes, eventually. They were led by Ezra and Nehemiah. But remember that it was the Babylonian Empire was overcome by the Persian Empire.
Yeah, 500 BC.
And then the Persian Empire was followed by the Greek Empire. And then the Greek Empire was followed by the Roman Empire. And all of that was in the span of about 1,000 years. That's all.
Wow.
Just 1,000 years. Yeah. So even after destruction, even after the reestablishment of Jewish autonomy in Israel, the building of the second Beis Hamikdash under the auspices of Koresh. Yeah. Even after that, there was a very vital and flourishing Jewish community in Babylon, and there was communication between the sages of Israel and Babylon, and the Talmud is full of discussions of rabbis going back and forth and what each community held on different positions and comparing notes and so forth and so on. Yeah. And of course that was the foundation of by and large, the Jewish population in Iraq until recent times. The Iraqi Jews are all descendants, by and large, of Jews that were living there from the times of the destruction of the First Temple. Very old and illustrious community. But in any case, here he's talking about after the destruction of the Second Temple at the hands of the Romans, and after the compilation of the Talmud, Bavli, I guess, things started to fall apart. There was wars, going east and west and north and south, and therefore this and that and the other thing, and so Jews were disconnected from one another and kind of isolated in the different communities of exile, more so than there had been beforehand. So he says, at that point, you no longer had many academies with tens and hundreds of thousands of students, miskabtzim, yechidim, rather you only had individuals getting together. Hasridim asher Hashem koire b'chol ir v'ir b'chol medina, the remnants of the Torah scholars that God appointed from city to city and from country to country, voiskim b'Torah, u'menivim b'chiburi chachamim kulam. These select individuals did understand the texts from the sages of early generations, v'yodim mehem derech hamishpat he'echu, and they knew the way of God's judgment, the way it should be. But the vast majority of the Jewish people had been cut off from serious Torah scholarship and could not properly learn the texts that had been given, the Mishnah and the Gemara. After this period of the Amoraim, the ones who sealed the Talmud, you had the period that's called the Gaonim, the Gaonic period. The period of the Gaonim is approximately from the year 500 to 700 or 800, 200, 300 years. Asher Yodu Kol Talmud, they knew the entire Talmud, Bavli, Yerushalmi, V'Sifra, V'Sifri, V'Tosefta. They knew all of these texts that the author had made reference to in the earlier section that we read last week. The different Talmudim, that of the Yerushalmi, the Bavli, and also different types of Midrashic works, the Sifra, the Sifri, the Sefta. Hem hotziu la'or ta'alumosav shel Talmud uber inyanov. They revealed the hidden light from the Talmud and they explained its matters. Lefi derech Talmud omaku meod, since the Talmud is very deep. V'od shuhu b'lashon Arami, it's in Aramaic. Me'rav im lashonos acheros, mixed in with different other languages, primarily Hebrew, but also Greek and Roman, and even a little bit of Parsi. Me'ravim l'shonos acheros, l'fisha oiso halashon ha'isa berua l'chulam bevavel, because that was the lingua franca of Babylon. Yes, the French language.
That's the language they talked and spoke.
Yes, the vernacular.
And that's why it's written in that language.
Yes, that's why the Babylonian Talmud was written in Babylonic. I mean in Aramaic, because that was the language they spoke in Babylon at the time.
The Jews or
The Jews,
whole country?
the Jews in the whole country.
It's like Americans speak
Yeah,
English.
yeah, yeah. Like American Jews speak
And
English.
there's
But I thought
Yeshivish.
it's also
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What?
I thought it's also to hide things in the Talmud that not everybody can.
No, I don't think that's the reason, and that's not the reason he's saying here. The reason he's saying here, because like I said, that was the vernacular. The Jews spoke Aramaic.
Wow.
The Mishnah is composed in Lashon HaKodesh, because the Mishnah was composed by the sages who were living in Israel before, before this major shift of Talmudic learning went from Israel to Babylon. And by the time that the Babylon Talmud was written, it was written in Aramaic primarily, because that was the language most of the Jews understood then.
The Mishnah's
Before.
Before that first.
Yeah.
Temple.
What?
Around. Wait.
Mishnah's after the first temple.
After them.
I mean,
But it's in Hebrew.
yes, yes.
And it was written in Israel.
It was written in Israel. It was written in Israel.
The Mishnah in Yerushalmi and Bavli is the same, or?
Not the same wording exactly, but they parallel.
Oh.
They parallel one another. What?
Mission is different?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
So meaning was written by different people.
I don't think they have the. I think they have this. It's the same Mishnah, but
Recorded?
it was recorded slightly differently, so that they parallel each other, but they're not exactly the same.
And do they call it Gemara too in Yerushalmi, or is there a different name? Or
What?
is there a Gemara in Yerushalmi?
Yes, that's when we talk about the Yerushalmi, we're primarily talking about the Gemara's explanation on the Mishnah.
Okay. And that's in Hebrew.
In Hebrew, yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Oh.
since that was written in Israel.
Interesting.
Both the Mishnah and the Gemara was written after the destruction of the Second Temple, based on teachings that were in existence beforehand,
Or
orally.
During the oral tradition.
Yeah, as part of the oral tradition. But once it was written down after the destruction of the Second Temple, it was first written around the year 200 in Hebrew, under the auspices of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, which we saw earlier here in the text. And then, a few hundred years later, on the year 400, 450, the Bavli was written, and the Yerushalmi was written. I think the Yerushalmi was written in around 350 CE, and the Bavli a bit later, around 400, 450. But the Mishnah was in any case written in Hebrew, and the Gemara in the Yerushalmi was written in Hebrew, but the Gemara of the Bavli was written in Aramaic. Why? Because in Babylon most of the Jews spoke Aramaic.
It's not Aramaic, it's a mix.
Where? In the Talmud?
And the Gemara.
And in the Gemara, yeah. Gemara Bavli is a mix.
It's not pure Aramaic.
That's right.
It's like Yiddish, right?
It's Hebrew. It's like what? Like Yiddish?
Yeah, like how Yiddish is a mix of German and Hebrew. German.
I would say that maybe Aramaic itself could be viewed in that way. Aramaic itself is kind of like Hebrew and another language mixed in together, like Yiddish. But the Gemara itself is not like that. It's either, when it's Aramaic, and when it's Hebrew, it's Hebrew.
Oh.
It uses both languages, but each is a separate kind of language.
Saying Aramaic itself is like a mix.
Yes.
The Aramaic that they spoke.
Yeah,
Aramaic
yeah. When you learn Aramaic in the Gemara, you see that it's very similar to Hebrew.
It's the same letters.
Well, in the Talmud, it's printed with the same letters,
But it's not.
and I don't know. In other words, there are non-Jews who speak Aramaic
Right.
in Turkey, and
But they don't write in Hebrew letters.
I don't know what letters they write in. I don't know.
Arabic.
Arabic is also very similar to Hebrew. They also write from right to left. The characters are different, but I just mean the language. Language.
Just a quick irrelevant question. I apologize, but the Aramaic people are descendants of who?
The Aramaic people,
Yeah, the original.
the people who spoke Aramaic,
Yeah. And
Are you asking, like,
Babylon-
are you asking-
Babylonian? That's what I'm saying.
the Babylonian people.
Babylonian who spoke Aramaic, right?
There might have been different types of people in Babylon, but some spoke Aramaic, and the Jews there certainly spoke Aramaic. And they're non-Jewish communities, like I said, in Turkey and in other of these Near Eastern countries that still speak Aramaic to this
Right.
day. Even in places like Bukhari, places like that part of the world, there are also communities that speak Aramaic.
Right.
But are you asking what's the source of the
Babylonians who took us out of Israel? Are they descendants of anyone specific in the Bible? In the Torah? that we know of.
I mean, the Torah definitely talks about Pras, Persia. The Torah also, of course, talks about the Tower of Bavel, right? That was the Tower of Babylon. And it was built there in Babylon.
That's where the languages get started.
Yeah.
All 70.
Yeah, that's why we talk about babbling. The person is babbling on, speaking incoherently, because God babbled their language in Babel, in Bavel. But in any case, so you see already there in the Torah itself, it talks about that area was populated by people who went there. They went there and they found a fertile region, and they built the tower and so forth and so on. But exactly where they came from, in other words, if we can attribute the people of Babylon to one specific kind of persona in the Torah or not, I'm not sure. There was Gomer and there was others. I don't know for sure. Yeah, Gomer and Paras and like in Arabic, of course, very similar to Hebrew as well. Like the Quran, for example, always talks about al-mutikun, the righteous. What is mutikun? The language amit-tukanim, hamit-tukanim, the ones who are like perfected, corrected. And the same thing with the poor, al-musukanun, like the maskenim. Misken is a person who's poor. Poor.
Same as Hebrew.
Yeah, similar. Yeah.
Sadaqah.
What?
Sadaqah.
Can you speak Arabic?
No. It's the same version. Tzedakah.
What is it?
Tzedakah.
Tzedakah.
Sadaqah.
Tzedakah. Yeah. So in Arabic, the same thing.
Sadaq.
Yeah, Sadaq. Yeah. So in any case, to avoid babbling on, let's get forward here in the text. That language was known to all in Bavel at the time that the Talmud was composed. But in other places and later periods, like the period of the Gaonim, that went after the Talmud, Asher Bavel, Lo hayu mekirim oiso haloshon. They did not know that language of Aramaic. Ad shilmedu until they learned it. Usheilos rabois hayu shoylim anshe kol ir v'ir. Many questions arose in different cities. L'chol goyin asher haya b'yamehem, to all of the which were addressed to these great rabbis in their respective places. The faresh lehem dvorim kashim shebetalmud, to explain to them the difficult matters in the Talmud. V'emayu meshivin lehem kefi hachmasam, and they replied according to their Torah knowledge. V'oisam hashoyalim hayu mekabbetzim hateshuvois, and the people who asked the questions gathered the answers. V'oisim mehem sefarim lahavin mehem, and made books in order to understand from them. And this became kind of like the beginning of what we call the responsa literature, because people would write questions to the Gaonim, and the Gaonim would respond with answers, and a body of literature developed, which is called the responses. What?
Why were they so lengthy?
Why were they so lengthy?
Why didn't you yes or no?
Because they were deep because they were deep issues, and they were not asking so much yes or no. They were asking for clarifications. What does it mean, and in what situations would it be applicable, and what not, and under what circumstances? It means. Gam chibur ha'gaonim shebechol dor v'dor chiburim leve'er Talmud, and these gaonim also wrote their own separate works in order to clarify the Talmud. Mehem mishe peresh halachos yechidos. Some of the works just explain some specific laws. Umehem mishe peresh mesechtos v'sedorim. Some of the works clarified entire tractates or entire orders. Vod chibru halakos pesukos be'inyan ha'asur v'hamutar. And they also gave just concise answers, like you were saying before, right? Permitted or not. Ve'chiyu v'apitur, responsible, obligated, or exempt. But dvarim she'oso she'ashar tzrichtim, regarding matters that were needed at the time, k'dei she'yu k'roivim l'ma'da mishe'enu yochol leired amko shel Talmud. In order that people who would not otherwise be capable to tap the depth of the Talmud would nevertheless be able to receive guidance through these Gaonim. That was the Gaonic period. Okay? kind of a history here of Jewish academic literature, Jewish scholarship. V'yesh tfusim shehetiku kan. Oh, this is a note of the author here. Hold on, let's of the publisher. The publisher says here, Yesh tfusim shehetiku kan es hemshech divrei harambam zal behakdamaso the Mishnah Torah ve'ilu dvarav. The printer here says that there are some versions of this book that have the following section included, which is a continuation of the language of the Rambam from the Mishnah in his prologue to the Mishnah Torah, where that kind of suggests that everything we've seen until now about this history of the Jewish scholarship is also from the Rambam. So the point here is, did our author end his kind of paraphrasing or quotation from the Rambam about Jewish historical scholarship here, or did it go on further? So therefore he's saying there are some versions of this book that continue the language of the Rambam. And that's the next section, which seems to be in slightly different font. Or no, maybe not. I don't know. Is it smaller a bit? I don't know. But then it skips down to the next thing. But I'm finding it personally interesting. So if you don't mind, let's go further. Let's continue and read this insert. V'zohi malechas Hashem. This is the service of God. She'osu ba kol goinei Israel, that was done by all of the leaders of Israel. Miyom shechubar Talmud va'ad zman hazeh, from the time the Talmud was composed until our times. Shehi shana sheminis achar mi'elef achar mea ve'elef. It is the 8th year after 1,100, meaning the year 1108. L'chorban habayis, from the destruction of the temple. Okay? We're over 2,000 years from that point. This was written 1,108 years after the destruction. Wow. V'hishnas arba alafim u'seshameos u'shloshim v'shevel brios ha'olam. And that is the 4,937th year of the Brios Ha'olam. 4,900. And we're 5,700. Approximately 900 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ubazman hazeh takfu tzaros yoseros. From that time on, the trials and tribulations became worse. V'dachacha hasha'es hakol, and things became very pressing. I'm just going to paraphrase this. V'avda hachmas chachamenu, the wisdom of our sages was lost. Ubinas nevoinov nistatra, and the understanding of the wise men was dissembled. All of this, the literature that was written by the Gaonim, who at that time people saw they were very, very well clarified, became difficult for us to understand. And only a few people could understand them in our times. And it goes without saying that the Talmud, Yerushalmi, and Bavli are very obtuse. V'sifra, v'tosefos, meaning Toseftas. Shehem tzrichim da'as rechova v'nefesh chachamos man oroch, who need, according to the Rambam, who is a great mind, says you need great knowledge and very wise understanding, and a long time to properly understand. And only afterwards can you know the proper path bidvorim asurim utorim, with things that are permitted or asur, ushar dini Torah echu, and all the other laws of the Torah, what they may be. Umipnei zeh shinasti mosnai, because of this, the Rambam says, I girdled my belt. Ani Moshe ben Maimon Hasfardi, me, Moshe the son of Maimon from Spain. V'nishanti al Hatzur Baruch Hu, I put my trust on God. Ubinoisi be'elu hasforim. I tried my best to understand these books. V'ra'isi lechaber dvorim hamizbarim mikol elu achiburim be'inyan ha'asur v'mutar. Therefore I saw fit to try and make some clarity through all of these books about what's permitted and not. Otome v'tohar, what's impure and impure. Himshar din Torah, with all the rest of the laws of the Torah. Kulam b'loshen berura v'derech tzara, in a clear language which is concise. Ad shetei Torah shebal pei kula sidura b'fi hakol, so that the oral Torah should be something which is clear in the mouths of all. V'lo kushya u'v'lo peruk, without difficulties or without challenges. Lo ze omer b'choi v'ze b'cho, to avoid a situation where this person says that and the other person says another. El dvorim burim, rather the matter should be clear. Krovim, nearby. Nechonim, correct. According to the law that can be derived from all of these works, that is the Talmud Bavli, Yerushalmi, Sifra, Sifri, Toseftas, Goinim, and all the different works that are in existence from the time of Rabbeinu Kadosh at the times of the Mishnah until our times. Until all of the laws should be clear to both who are both great and small. You think about that, what a tremendous task, an undertaking the Rambam took upon himself.
How many years did it take him?
I don't know. But can you imagine?
Yeah.
Do you imagine the undertaking that he took upon himself to throw himself into the depths of all of these very obscure and difficult to understand texts and tractates and commentaries, and synthesize all of that information about the entire Torah in a very clear and concise language that should be a ready set table for all Jews for all generations to come, considering the fact that we were going deeper and deeper into exile, and the Jewish mind and Jewish Torah knowledge would become more and more constricted and small. And he did all of this. It's an amazing, amazing undertaking. Yeah, Moshe. Bedin kol mitzvah, bedin kol advarim shetiknu chachamim v'nevim. According to all of the laws that were enacted by the rabbis and by the prophets, klala shel davar, the general principle, rule of thumb here, the Rambam says, is kedei shelo yeh adam tzorich l'chibur acher ba'olam. A person will not need another book, bedin Israel, regarding the laws of Israel. This work should be a conglomerate of all of the oral Torah kula, with all the additional legislation and enactments that existed from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu until the Talmud. As was explained by the Gaonim who wrote their books after the Talmud. Therefore I called, the Rambam says, this work the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's magnum opus. Which was written in the lingua franca of the Jews. In all times and all places. No. In Jewish.
It's all written in Hebrew.
Yeah. Yeah, it was written in Hebrew. Yeah, some of the things he wrote was in Aramaic, but the Mishnah Torah was written in Hebrew. The reason is because the person first starts reading from the Torah in the written Torah, and then he reads in this book of his, the Mishnah Torah. Therefore it's called the Mishnah Torah, the repetition of the Torah, because it goes hand in hand together with the Torah, kind of like the Torah handbook. First you read the Torah, and then you read the Rambam's Mishnah Torah to explain to you what the Torah is telling you regarding each and every halacha. And in this way he can know the entire oral Torah without having to go through all of the Talmud. Because he distills for you.
Really?
Yes.
So why take Gemara classes?
As it turns out, the Rambam is not the only opinion. And others differed on the way that he learned or the conclusions that he that he reached, and so forth and so on.
Do they have a Mishnah Torah as well?
No.
Oh.
So we do, but there are commentaries of other Rishonim And therefore, when you want to learn something properly, according to the traditional way of learning, and not according to the way the Rambam's sitting out here, you have to learn the Torah, you have to learn the Mishnah, you have to learn the oral Torah, the Bav, the Yerushalmi, all of the Rishonim and the Acharonim, and the final. Of course, the Rambam has a very weighty part in that whole process. Yeah. But the Rambam, but the Mishnah Torah was not accepted in the vast majority of communities in the way that he's outlining here, as a very important part of Jewish academics, but not the only work in addition to the Torah. We have to finish here. Ve'ein tzarich likros sefer acher b'nehem. He says there's no need to read any book in between, just the Torah and the Mishnah Torah.
He gave that the potential to be like that.
Yeah.
He put so much.
Yes, but this approach of the Rambam was not accepted. No, it's not Gaividik. No. He was just trying to elucidate and consolidate Jewish learning for the entire Jewish people. Very good, well-intentioned, and very, very scholarly, and a very, very important part of Jewish learning, but not as central as the Rambam had envisioned. Yeah. Yeah, but even the Sephardim didn't consider only the Rambam. There was the Rashba and the Ritva and the Ramban and many others. Yeah. All right, we have to end here and let our cameraman get to the next class.